I stood in the kitchen of the house I'd lived in for 43 years, watching my daughter-in-law Vanessa slide a lottery ticket across the marble counter. Her smile had that sharp edge I'd learned to recognize over the past 6 months since she and my son Derek moved in. The ticket sat there between us like a weapon. She said the words slowly. $87 million, Margaret. That's what this is worth. And you know what? I think it's time you found somewhere else to live. I picked up my coffee mug, the one with the chipped handle that Derek made in 4th grade, and took a long sip. Then I asked her the question that would change everything. Are you absolutely sure about that, Vanessa? If you're watching from anywhere in America, hit subscribe and drop your state in the comments. What happened next proves karma works everywhere. She laughed, actually threw her head back and laughed like I'd just told the funniest joke she'd ever heard. Her ponytail swung as she turned toward the window overlooking my garden, the one I'd planted when Derek was in diapers. Morning light caught the diamond bracelet on her wrist, the one she'd bought last month with money from their joint account. She said Derek was completely on board, that they'd discussed it last night after I'd gone to bed. According to her, my son had finally agreed that 3 generations under one roof was too much strain. I set down my mug, noticing my hand wasn't shaking despite the adrenaline. Behind Vanessa, through that window, I could see Robert's workshop, the small shed where my late husband had spent Saturdays building birdhouses and teaching Derek how to use tools. The workshop held more than memories. It held the truth about that lottery ticket, but Vanessa didn't know that yet. My 72 years had taught me patience, and I'd need every bit of it now. I'd watched her buy that ticket 3 days earlier at Morton's Gas and Grocery on 5th Street, right after she'd borrowed $20 from my purse without asking. She thought I hadn't noticed her fingers slipping into my bag while I waited at the pharmacy counter. I'd noticed plenty over 6 months. The eye rolls when I suggested recipes, how she'd rearranged my furniture without asking, the credit card statements showing purchases at expensive stores. But the lottery ticket was different. I'd stood behind a display of greeting cards and watched her fill out the numbers, watched her hand my $20 bill to Morton's teenage son. What she didn't know was that I'd done something about it immediately. Something that required patience, but 7 decades had taught me that in abundance. I'd walked to that same counter 6 minutes later and done something that seemed small but would prove crucial. The evidence sat in Robert's safe right now. Derek walked in then, my son with his father's eyes and inability to see past a pretty face. He was dressed for work in the navy suit I'd helped him pick out last year when he made senior accountant at Brennan and Associates. He glanced between us, registering the tension crackling in the air. Vanessa spoke first, her voice suddenly softer. "Honey, I was just telling your mother about our wonderful news and discussing some changes to our living situation." Derek's face did something complicated, guilt mixed with determination. He cleared his throat 3 times before speaking, a nervous habit since childhood. He said they'd been talking, that maybe it was time for me to consider Sunset Meadows, the assisted living facility out on Route 12. The words hit like a slap, but I kept my face neutral. A skill learned from 23 years married to a man who thought emotions were weakness. I asked quietly if I could have until Monday to pack. Derek's face flooded with relief, the same expression he'd worn at 8 when I'd told him I wasn't mad about the broken lamp. Vanessa practically glowed, already pulling out her phone. They left for work 20 minutes later, Derek kissing my cheek and promising Chinese food for dinner, Vanessa calling that she'd help me pack this weekend. I waited until Derek's Camry disappeared around the corner before I moved. My knees ached as I stood, arthritis reminding me that 72 wasn't 22, but my mind felt sharper than it had in years. I walked to Robert's workshop. The key hung on its brass hook by the back door, worn smooth from decades of use. Inside the workshop, beneath Robert's old workbench, sat a fireproof safe. I turned the dial, 4/17/62, Derek's birthday. Inside were documents spanning our life. But I reached for the folder marked April 2025 and pulled out 2 lottery tickets, both with identical numbers. The first ticket, in Vanessa's looping handwriting, was the one she'd shown me this morning. The second, in my cramped writing, was the one that would change everything. I'd bought it 6 minutes after watching her, using my own $20 bill, copying her numbers exactly. What were the odds we'd pick the same combination? 100% when you're deliberately copying. But here's what mattered. I'd asked Morton's son to write down the exact time and initial my receipt. Morton's kept security footage for 90 days, and I'd smiled at the camera when I'd made my purchase, holding up the ticket clearly. My receipt read 10:43 in the morning. Vanessa's purchase had been at 10:37. 6 minutes separated our transactions, 6 minutes that would prove everything. And Vanessa had made one critical mistake. She'd used my money. $20 taken without permission. In the eyes of the law, that was theft. I sat on Robert's old stool and thought through the complete picture. The winning numbers announced last night were 4, 17, 23, 31, 42, and Powerball 9. I'd chosen them deliberately because they meant something. 4 years Robert and I dated, 17 for Derek's age when Robert died, 23 years we had together, 31 for our house number, 42 for Derek's current age, 9 for September when we met. Vanessa had chosen them randomly, playing her gut-feeling numbers. Pure coincidence they matched mine. Except it wasn't coincidence at all. I'd been standing right there watching every number she circled. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister Linda in Columbus. Heard about the winning ticket in your town. Did you play? I typed back. Yes. Interesting story developing. Call you tonight. Linda was a retired paralegal who'd spent 35 years in family law. She'd know exactly what to do. I locked the safe and walked back inside. The property deed sat in that safe too, showing the house was paid off 15 years ago. Derek didn't know that. He'd assumed his name was somehow on the deed, that family property was communal. Vanessa definitely believed that, had called it our house to her friends. I'd let them believe what they wanted, because sometimes the best trap is the one people build themselves. I started coffee, the good dark roast I saved for special occasions. Today qualified. Today I stopped being the accommodating mother-in-law and became a 72-year-old woman who'd earned her place in this world. I'd survived a difficult marriage, raised Derek alone after becoming a widow, built a life through careful planning. Today I protected myself with every tool available. The lottery ticket in Robert's safe, security footage at Morton's, receipts with timestamps, and documentation I'd create today. Robert's business disputes taught me that paper and video tell unchanged stories forever. The house felt different that afternoon as I moved through it. I saw clearly for the first time in months how Vanessa had been erasing me. She'd brought throw pillows I'd never chosen, hung artwork I'd never purchased, moved my wedding photo from the mantel to a shelf in the guest room. Small changes I'd allowed, thinking I was being flexible. But it wasn't our home. It was my home, bought with Robert's salary from 30 years managing the hardware store, maintained with my bookkeeping earnings after he died. Derek had grown up here but moved out at 22. He'd only returned 6 months ago because of a condo flood I was beginning to suspect hadn't been as bad as claimed. I'd found a letter about unpaid condo dues totaling $6,200. Financial trouble they'd hidden while living rent-free in my house. The picture was becoming clear. By 3 o'clock, I'd made critical phone calls from my bedroom. First, Morton himself, asking about security cameras and receipt records. He explained everything was digital now, backed up to the cloud, accessible for 90 days. Second, the Lottery Commission. A representative named Barbara explained the claim process. Winners had 180 days to come forward, needed the physical ticket and ID, and prizes over $50,000 required verification, including checking where and when the ticket was purchased. Barbara mentioned they'd already had 3 false claims that morning. I asked what happened if 2 people claimed identical numbers. She said it came down to who could prove they held the actual winning ticket, and surveillance footage was gold standard evidence. Third call was to Linda, who listened to everything without interrupting. Linda asked smart questions from decades of legal experience. Had I photographed my ticket? Did I have the receipt? Had I told anyone? Could I prove my money was mine? Had Vanessa explicitly claimed she won? Yes, to all. Linda was quiet, then said, "Margaret, you have a legitimate legal claim." But more than that, Linda explained, I had what appeared to be financial elder abuse. Adult children moving in with an elderly parent, isolating her, taking control, pressuring her into a nursing home. The money taken from my purse, plans for my house, decisions about my future without legal authority, all pointed to a troubling pattern courts took seriously. Linda asked if I wanted her to drive over. I said not yet, that I wanted to see how far Vanessa would take her lie. Linda made me promise to call if anything escalated, to keep documents safe, and to start a detailed journal. Then she said something that made me smile. Mom didn't raise us to be pushovers. Show her what a determined 72-year-old woman can do. We talked for 20 more minutes about strategy and documentation. Linda said handwritten journals carried weight in legal proceedings because they showed contemporaneous documentation. So, I wrote everything. Dates, times, exact quotes, Vanessa's behavior, Derek's complicity. My handwriting was shaky, but every word was legible and accurate. Derek came home at 5:30 with Chinese food, the smell filling my kitchen. Vanessa arrived 15 minutes later with shopping bags from the mall. She'd bought new curtains and a duvet cover, charged everything to their credit card because why worry about debt when you're about to be worth $87 million? I set the table like I had thousands of times. We sat down, this fractured family, and I watched them plan for money that wasn't theirs. Vanessa talked about Europe, a vacation home in Florida, getting Derek out of his soul-crushing job so he could pursue his real passion. I asked what Derek's real passion was. Vanessa waved her fork and said everyone knew Derek had always wanted to write a novel. Derek looked uncomfortable, stabbing at his rice, muttering it was just a passing thought. But Vanessa was rolling now, talking about how they'd been trapped by circumstances, by needing to live here, with her, like I wasn't sitting 3 feet away. I ate slowly, watching my son fail to defend me, fail to be the man his father tried to raise. After dinner, Vanessa disappeared to make calls, her excited voice carrying as she shared news with everyone. I heard her embellished version. She'd always had a feeling about those numbers, invested her last $20 in hope. This was karma rewarding her struggles. Each lie built on the last. Derek helped me clear dishes. In that moment alone, I asked him directly, "Do you think it's right? Asking me to leave my own home?" He couldn't meet my eyes. He mumbled something about Sunset Meadows being nice, about Vanessa thinking I'd be happier with people my age. I asked what he thought, not Vanessa. He said he needed to support his wife, that marriage meant compromise, that I'd understand when I wasn't so emotional. I dried the last dish and told him I'd start packing tomorrow. His relief was painful to witness. That night, lying in bed, I listened to them celebrate through the walls. Champagne corks popped, music played. Their laughter filtered through. I thought about how we justify betrayal to ourselves, the stories we tell to make cruelty seem reasonable. Vanessa believed she deserved that money, this house, deserved to push aside the woman who'd welcomed her. Derek believed he was being a good husband, choosing his wife appropriately. Neither thought about the woman who'd sacrificed everything to raise a son alone after her husband's death, who'd worked 2 jobs for Derek's college, who'd given up her dreams for his. I'd been invisible to them for months, furniture to work around, an obligation to manage. Tomorrow I'd start becoming visible again. Tomorrow I'd show them what they'd underestimated. Friday morning arrived with rain, steady downpour turning everything gray. I was up at 6, decades of early rising making sleep impossible. Derek left early, barely speaking. Vanessa appeared at 9 in silk pajamas, phone pressed to her ear. She was talking to a financial advisor about trusts and tax strategies and investments. I sat with my own phone, photographing her, documenting this conversation about managing money she didn't legally possess. Vanessa noticed me watching and smiled patronizingly. I asked if she'd actually verified the numbers with the lottery commission. She waved her hand and said, of course, everything matched, she'd checked online. But had she called? Had she started the official claim process? Vanessa's smile faltered slightly. She said she was waiting until Monday, until she'd talked to lawyers and set up proper structures. Smart people didn't rush these things, she informed me condescendingly. I nodded and returned to my coffee, letting her believe I was the simple, elderly woman she'd decided I was. Meanwhile, my phone recorded every claim she made about her winnings. Linda had explained that evidence was everything, that I needed clear proof of Vanessa's intentions and attempts to defraud. So I collected that proof, one conversation at a time. Vanessa spent the morning shopping online, mentally spending those $87 million a dozen different ways. A Tesla, beach house, designer furniture, complete wardrobe overhaul, exclusive club memberships. By noon, Vanessa had invited her mother, Carol, and sister Kristen for a celebration lunch. I offered to leave, but she insisted I stay. Carol arrived first, a thin woman who'd always looked at me like I was a stain. Carol brought champagne and hugged Vanessa dramatically, exclaiming about divine providence and deserved blessings. Kristen arrived with her husband Brad. They gathered in my living room, popping bottles and toasting Vanessa's good fortune while I sat in Robert's old chair. Carol made a speech about how Vanessa had always been special, always deserved the best, how this money would finally give her the life she was meant for. Nobody mentioned Derek. Nobody mentioned me. We were just accessories to Vanessa's destiny. Kristen asked about the house, wondering if Vanessa would keep it or buy something better. Vanessa glanced at me, weighing how honest to be. She settled on diplomatic. They'd probably renovate extensively, make it truly theirs. Carol suggested knocking down walls, updating everything, erasing old-fashioned choices while looking at my wedding photo. Brad, who'd been quiet, asked the question I'd been waiting for. Had Vanessa actually claimed the prize yet? Vanessa repeated her answer about waiting until Monday, being strategic and smart. Brad nodded slowly, but something in his expression suggested skepticism. He was an insurance adjuster, trained to spot fraud. I liked Brad suddenly. I caught his eye and saw recognition there. He helped me carry glasses to the kitchen while Vanessa walked her mother out. Brad said quietly, "Mrs. Henderson, have you checked your purse lately? Your wallet?" I met his eyes and told him I checked both regularly, that at my age you learned to be vigilant because people sometimes assumed elderly meant vulnerable. Brad nodded, washed his hands and said, "My grandmother always said trust was earned through actions, not automatic through family, even with family, especially with family." Then Kristen called him and he left, but that exchange told me I wasn't alone in seeing truth. Some people recognized manipulation even when it wore a pretty face. Friday evening brought whispered conversations between Derek and Vanessa behind closed doors. I packed boxes in my bedroom, making a show of sorting clothes, but really organizing my documentation. Every receipt, photograph, recorded conversation went into a folder for Linda. Linda had emphasized handwritten journals carried particular weight, because they demonstrated contemporaneous documentation rather than after-the-fact construction. So I wrote everything in careful detail with dates and times and exact quotes. My handwriting was shakier than before, arthritis making my fingers ache, but every word was legible. This journal would become my insurance against a daughter-in-law who decided I was disposable. Saturday morning brought unexpected visitors. My grandson Tyler and his girlfriend Emma, both home from Ohio State for the weekend. Tyler was Derek's son from his first marriage, a sweet kid who'd stayed close to me even after his parents' divorce when he was 7. He'd heard from his mother about the lottery and Sunset Meadows plans and driven 3 hours to check on me. We sat on the front porch, drinking lemonade while Vanessa slept late. Tyler said his dad had seemed weird on the phone, distracted and guilty. Emma, studying social work, asked direct questions about my living situation. Did I feel safe? Was I being pressured? Did I have support? I answered carefully, aware Tyler loved his father despite Derek's flaws. But I answered honestly. Yes, I felt pressured. No, I didn't want to leave. Yes, I had support through Linda. Tyler asked about the lottery directly. I'd always been honest with my grandson, never treated him like a child needing protection. So I told him everything. Watching Vanessa take my $20, observing her buy the ticket, immediately buying my own with identical numbers using my money, having receipts and footage proving both transactions. Tyler's face went through emotions: surprise, confusion, anger, determination. He pulled out his phone and started taking notes like conducting an investigation. Emma listened quietly, asking about my emotional state, my support, what outcome I wanted. I told them the truth. I wanted Derek to see what he'd married, wanted my home to remain mine, wanted justice without destroying my family completely. Emma said something wise. Sometimes families destroy themselves through their own choices, and the best we can do is protect the innocent and hold the guilty accountable. We talked for 2 hours on that porch while neighbors walked dogs. Tyler made me promise to let him help, to keep him informed, to call if I felt unsafe. He said he'd talk to his dad, try to make Derek see reason, though we both knew Derek's history of choosing romantic partners over family reality. Emma suggested I document everything with photographs showing this was my long-term home. Smart girl. I'd started doing that, but took more photos that afternoon with Emma's help. Pictures of Robert's belongings in his workshop after 25 years. Family photos spanning decades. My personal items in every room. We created a visual record of my life here. Proof I wasn't a temporary guest, but the legal owner and primary resident. Tyler uploaded everything to a cloud storage account he created for me, showing me how to access files from my phone. Vanessa emerged around noon, surprised to find Tyler and Emma. She put on her sweet stepmother act, hugging Tyler and complimenting Emma's hair. She offered lunch, but Tyler said they needed to get back to Columbus. Before leaving, Tyler asked Vanessa casually about the lottery ticket, the claim process, whether she'd verified everything officially. Vanessa's answers were smooth and confident. She'd checked online, the ticket was secure, they'd claim properly Monday through official channels. Tyler nodded like he believed her, but as he hugged me goodbye, he whispered in my ear, "Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. We've got your back, Grandma." The relief I felt hearing those words almost broke me. Almost, but not quite. I'd cried enough in 72 years. Now was time for steel, not tears. Emma hugged me too, slipping a business card for a legal aid organization specializing in elder law into my hand. Sunday was quiet, deceptively peaceful, the calm before Monday's storm. Derek and Vanessa went to brunch with friends, leaving me alone for 3 hours. I used that time to visit Morton's, where Morton showed me his security camera system personally. He pulled up April 10th footage without me asking. There was Vanessa at 10:37, then me at 10:43. Morton burned the footage to a USB drive, saying he'd heard rumors about a lottery dispute and wanted to help. Small-town networks were beautiful when you'd lived somewhere 43 years, been a good neighbor, paid your bills on time. Morton also printed transaction records showing both purchases, $20 each, both on April 10th, different times. The evidence was damning and irrefutable. I stopped at Linda's house, the drive to Columbus taking an hour 45, but feeling necessary. We sat at her kitchen table while she reviewed everything. Photographs of both tickets, receipts with timestamps, security footage, recorded conversations, my journal, residence photos. Linda made copies of everything, organized it into a legal folder, wrote out a timeline. Then she called a lawyer friend specializing in lottery disputes, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen who agreed to meet Monday morning at 9. Patricia's retainer was $5,000, money I had in savings from years of planning and Robert's life insurance. Linda offered to loan it, but I refused gently. I'd been preparing for emergencies my entire life, saving and planning so I could handle whatever crisis arrived. This qualified, but it was one I could afford to fight with professional help. Patricia would send a cease and desist letter to Vanessa before she attempted to claim the prize, would notify the lottery commission about the dispute, would file for an emergency injunction if necessary. Linda explained that Patricia was excellent at these cases, had handled 3 lottery disputes in 5 years and won all 3. I drove home as sunset, my car loaded with documentation copies and a certainty I hadn't felt in months. The house was dark when I arrived, Derek and Vanessa apparently out for dinner. I made soup and a grilled cheese, ate slowly at my table, and thought about Robert. He'd been difficult and complicated, emotionally distant and controlling about money, but he'd taught me about documentation and record-keeping and protecting yourself legally. Those years watching him handle contracts at the hardware store were paying off now. Robert always said people revealed true character through actions when they thought nobody was watching. Vanessa had revealed hers repeatedly, and I'd been paying close attention even when she'd assumed I was just a senile old woman. Senile, I was not. Monday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of bright, cold day that felt appropriate for confrontations. I was dressed by 7 in my good Navy suit, kept pristine for important occasions. Linda picked me up at 8:15. We drove to Patricia Chen's office downtown. Patricia was younger than expected, maybe 45, with intelligent eyes and direct manner I appreciated immediately. She reviewed my evidence for 30 minutes without speaking, making notes, asking clarifying questions. When she looked up, she said with confidence, "Mrs. Henderson, you have an exceptionally strong case. The time-stamped receipts establish your purchase within minutes of hers. The security footage is irrefutable proof. The fact she used your money creates a legal complication that weakens her claim significantly." Patricia explained that using someone else's money to purchase a lottery ticket created ownership questions. But combined with my immediate independent purchase, using my documented funds, my claim was legally solid. Patricia called the Lottery Commission at 9:30, speaking to Supervisor David Chen. No relation. She explained there was a dispute over the winning ticket from Morton's, that she represented a claimant with documented proof, and that any claim by Vanessa Michelle Henderson should be held pending investigation. David said they'd received no claim yet, would flag the number immediately, and that prizes over $50,000 required thorough verification anyway. Patricia asked about protocol if two people claimed identical numbers. David explained it came down to who could prove they held the actual winning ticket purchased at verified location and time, and surveillance footage was gold standard evidence. We had that footage. Patricia thanked him, ended the call, told me to go home and wait. The trap was set. We needed Vanessa to walk into it, to attempt her claim, to commit fully to lies already documented and disproven. The waiting would be hardest, Patricia warned, but I needed to let Vanessa make the first move. Linda drove me home, both quiet, both understanding today would change everything. We pulled onto Maple Street at 11:15. I noticed Derek's car in the driveway. He should have been at work. Linda offered to come inside, but I said I needed to face this alone, that this was between me and my son and his choice about loyalty. She made me promise to call immediately if anything happened, to not let them pressure me, to remember I had legal representation and documented proof. I hugged my sister and walked up my front path. My hand shook, putting the key in the lock, but my resolve didn't waver. Inside, I heard voices, Derek's low rumble and Vanessa's higher pitch, clearly discussing something intense. I closed the door quietly and stood in my foyer, listening to them plan in my house. Derek appeared from the kitchen, face flushed and worried and angry. He said they needed to talk, that Vanessa had called the Lottery Commission and been told there was a dispute filed against her claim. His voice cracked on dispute, like he couldn't believe anyone would challenge his wife. I walked past him to the living room where Vanessa sat clutching her phone. Her makeup showed cracks now, mascara smudged. She looked up with fury and demanded to know what I'd done, why I'd interfered, what justification I had. I sat slowly in Robert's chair and asked her the same question from Friday. "Vanessa, where exactly did you get the $20 for that lottery ticket?" The room went silent, except for the grandfather clock ticking. Vanessa's eyes darted to Derek, seeking support. She said she'd used her own money, from her wallet, money she'd earned. I nodded and asked another careful question. "You're absolutely certain? Because we both know you took a 20 from my purse April 8th while I was at the pharmacy." Jeremy Morton was working register. He remembers. Security cameras captured everything. So I'll ask one final time, and I suggest you think carefully. Where did you get the money? Derek made a sound like he'd been struck. Vanessa's face went through rapid expressions before settling on defiant anger. She said taking $20 from family wasn't stealing, that families shared resources, that I was being ridiculous and petty. I pulled my phone from my purse and set it deliberately on the coffee table between us. The phone sat there like evidence, and Vanessa stared at it with growing fear. I explained calmly that I'd been recording our conversations for days, documenting every claim she'd made about winning the lottery, owning this house, having the right to force me into assisted living. I'd also obtained security footage from Morton's showing both purchases, time-stamped receipts proving I bought my ticket 6 minutes after hers using my money, and witness statements from Morton confirming both transactions. Derek sank onto the sofa arm, pale, looking between his wife and mother like he'd entered an alternate reality. I continued. I hired a lawyer this morning, Patricia Chen. She's already notified the lottery commission about this dispute. They've flagged the ticket number and will investigate thoroughly before releasing any money, including reviewing all security footage and purchase records I provided. Vanessa stood abruptly, knocking her phone to the floor. She started pacing, talking rapidly, saying I was a bitter old woman who couldn't stand seeing anyone happy, that I was jealous of her youth and future. She said I'd been undermining her for months, treating her like an intruder, making her feel judged. Derek tried to interrupt, but Vanessa talked over him, voice rising. She claimed she'd done nothing wrong, that borrowing from family wasn't theft, that buying a lottery ticket with it was legal, that the winning ticket was hers regardless of whose money purchased it. I let her talk herself out, let her build her defense brick by brick, each word potentially more evidence for court. When she finally stopped, breathing hard and glaring with undisguised hatred, I stood slowly and told her she had, until 5 o'clock today, to pack and leave my house permanently. Derek found his voice then, saying I couldn't just kick them out, that they had tenant rights, that legally I needed 30 days' notice. I'd expected this. Patricia had prepared me. I explained they weren't tenants. They were guests who'd never paid rent or signed a lease, that they'd moved in temporarily due to emergency, and that arrangement was ending. Furthermore, given Vanessa's attempts to claim ownership of my property and force me into assisted living, given her theft and fraudulent lottery claims, I had grounds for an immediate restraining order if necessary. Patricia had already drawn up paperwork. It sat in my purse, ready to be filed if they refused to leave voluntarily. Derek's face went from pale to flushed red. He said I was choosing money over family, that a real mother would be happy for her son, that Robert would be ashamed of how selfish I'd become. The mention of Robert ignited something cold in my chest. I walked to the mantel and picked up our wedding photo. I turned to Derek and said, "Your father would be ashamed of a son who stood by while his wife stole from his mother, lied about winnings, tried to force her from her home. Your father would be ashamed of a man who chose a woman he's known 3 years over the mother who raised him alone, worked 2 jobs for his college, gave him everything." Derek's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't stop. I told him Vanessa wasn't winning anything, that her ticket bought with my stolen money had no validity, that my ticket purchased with my documented funds 6 minutes later had the legitimate claim. Vanessa screamed then, an actual scream that probably startled neighbors. She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door, yelling back at Derek that she was going to the lottery office now, that she'd prove the ticket was hers, that no senile old woman would steal her future. Derek followed her, calling her name, trying to calm her. I stayed in the living room, listening to their car start, listening to tires screech as Vanessa drove away too fast. Then silence fell over my house like snow. I sat back down in Robert's chair and called Linda. My voice shook when I told her what happened. It's done. She's going to attempt to claim it now. Patricia needs to meet her there. Linda said Patricia was already on her way, prepared for exactly this scenario. The next 3 hours crawled past like days. I made tea I didn't drink. I walked through rooms seeing memories. Derek at 8 building Lego cities. Derek at 13 practicing trombone badly. Derek at 20 bringing home his first serious girlfriend who'd been kind. I'd watched my son make poor choices before, but this felt different, felt final. This wasn't about a bad relationship or questionable job. This was about character, about who Derek had become, about values I'd thought I'd instilled, but apparently hadn't reinforced strongly enough. My phone rang at 2:45, Patricia's number. I answered on the second ring, heart hammering. Patricia's voice was calm but satisfied. "Mrs. Henderson, your daughter-in-law attempted to claim the prize 30 minutes ago." Patricia explained that Vanessa had arrived with her ticket, ID, and aggressive attitude that hadn't helped. She'd demanded immediate processing, insisted she had the winning ticket, became belligerent when staff asked verification questions. David Chen had personally handled the interview. He'd asked her to confirm where and when she purchased the ticket. She'd answered correctly. Morton's Gas and Grocery, April 10th. He'd asked what time. She'd hesitated, then said around 10:30. Close enough. Then he'd asked the critical question, what form of payment? Vanessa had said cash, her own cash from her wallet. David had thanked her, excused himself, returned 15 minutes later with a different expression. He'd informed Vanessa that records showed the ticket purchased at 10:37 had been bought with currency traced to a different individual's withdrawal. And furthermore, there was a second ticket purchased at 10:43 with identical numbers using documented funds from that other individual's account. Vanessa had demanded to know who, threatened legal action, called David incompetent, made a scene requiring security escort. That's when Patricia appeared, identified herself as representing the other claimant, and provided David with my complete documentation. Time-stamped receipts, security footage, photographs of my ticket, bank records proving my withdrawal, signed statement from Morton confirming both transactions. David reviewed everything for 20 minutes, then called his legal department. The Lottery Commission's attorney confirmed what Patricia knew. My claim was legitimate, properly documented, legally sound. Vanessa's claim was compromised by fund source, by my subsequent purchase, by clear timeline. The attorney asked Patricia one final question. Did my ticket have proper security features consistent with purchase at stated time and location? Patricia had smiled and explained we had something better. Morton himself, confirming he personally remembered both sales because it was unusual for two customers within 6 minutes to pick identical numbers. We had Jeremy's signature on my receipt. We had footage showing me holding my ticket to the camera after purchase, a habit I developed years ago. The Lottery Commission's attorney made his decision. My claim would be processed pending standard verification, while Vanessa's would be formally rejected with notification of potential fraud investigation. If she persisted, they might refer to law enforcement for attempted theft by deception. Patricia said David had been apologetic, explaining they dealt with fraud regularly, but rarely saw it so thoroughly documented. He'd asked her to have me come Wednesday morning at 10 to begin formal claim process. My $87 million, minus taxes, would be processed within 6 to 8 weeks. I sat with phone pressed to ear, struggling to process the words. $87 million. After taxes, approximately $51 million. The amount felt abstract, impossible, disconnected from reality. Patricia was still talking about immediate steps, setting up a trust, determining lump sum versus annuity, engaging financial advisors and accountants specializing in sudden wealth, protecting assets from potential claims by Derek or Vanessa. She recommended lump sum despite larger tax burden, arguing that control of the full amount allowed better estate planning and investment flexibility. I told Patricia to proceed with whatever she recommended, trusting her expertise because I had no experience managing millions. She said she'd email a detailed checklist and reminded me firmly not to engage in further arguments with Derek or Vanessa. Linda arrived at 4 o'clock, having driven over when Patricia called her. She found me in the kitchen making coffee with shaking hands. My sister wrapped me in a hug that smelled like lavender and felt like safety. She cried happy tears while I stayed dry-eyed, too shocked to react emotionally. We sat at my table, and Linda asked what I wanted to do with $87 million. I had no answer. The money felt tainted, connected to betrayal and family rupture. Linda said money was neutral, just a tool I could use to build something good, help people, secure my future, maybe teach Derek about consequences. Derek's car pulled into the driveway at 4:47, 13 minutes before my deadline. I watched through the window as he and Vanessa sat inside, arguing based on visible gestures and body language. Finally, they emerged, Vanessa's face blotchy from crying, Derek's expression set in hard, angry lines. They entered without knocking. Linda stood beside me as they came into the kitchen, my sister's presence a silent message that I wasn't alone or vulnerable. Derek started talking immediately, words tumbling about misunderstandings and family loyalty and how we could work this out if I'd just be reasonable. Vanessa stayed silent, staring at the floor, all bravado gone. I let Derek talk himself out, watching him perform mental gymnastics to justify his wife's theft and his betrayal. When he finally stopped, breathing hard, I pulled out the notice Patricia had drafted. I'd printed it on my home printer. The notice stated clearly that Derek Henderson and Vanessa Michelle Henderson must vacate 42 Maple Street by 5 o'clock, that their residence had been temporary guest status without lease or tenant rights, and that continued presence after deadline would constitute trespassing. I slid the paper to Derek. He read it with growing disbelief. He said I couldn't do this. They had nowhere to go. I was being cruel and unreasonable over a misunderstanding. I told Derek there was no misunderstanding. Vanessa had stolen my money, purchased a ticket with stolen funds, attempted to claim prize money that wasn't hers, tried to force me from my home. Those weren't misunderstandings. Those were intentional acts revealing exactly who she was. Vanessa finally spoke, voice small and different. She said she was sorry. She'd made a mistake. She'd panicked when the ticket might win. She claimed she'd only borrowed the 20 intending to pay it back, that she'd been stressed. Her apology might have been partly sincere, but it was also strategic, calculated to elicit sympathy now that her scheme had collapsed. I looked at this woman my son married, this person who'd smiled while planning my displacement, and felt nothing but cold clarity. I told her intentions mattered less than actions, that she'd had multiple opportunities to come clean but had doubled down on lies, planned my assisted living removal, celebrated her fraudulent windfall with champagne and shopping. An apology offered only after being caught wasn't repentance. It was damage control. Derek slammed his hand on the table, making Linda and me jump. He demanded to know what I expected them to do, where they should go. I told Derek the truth. His housing wasn't my responsibility. He was a 42-year-old man with a job who could figure out a hotel tonight and apartment next week. I told him his wife had attempted to steal $87 million from his mother, and his response had been to support her, help plan my eviction, suggest assisted living like I was a problem to manage rather than a person deserving respect. I told him his father and I had raised him better, that somewhere he'd lost his moral compass, and I hoped he'd eventually find it again. But that journey would happen away from me. Away from my home, away from my life. Derek's eyes filled with angry tears, frustrated tears of someone confronted with consequences they'd convinced themselves would never come. He grabbed the notice, crumpled it, threw it on my floor, said I'd regret this, that I was choosing money over my only child, and I'd end up alone and bitter. I picked up the crumpled notice, smoothed it on the table, and corrected him quietly. I wasn't choosing money over family. I was choosing dignity and truth over manipulation and theft. There was a significant difference he might understand someday. They left at 4:58, exactly 2 minutes before my deadline, both carrying hastily packed suitcases and boxes thrown together frantically. Derek took clothes, laptop, toiletries, but left most belongings, probably assuming this was temporary, that I'd relent once my anger cooled. Vanessa took everything she could carry, including several items I was certain were mine. A throw blanket, kitchen utensils, a framed photo of Derek as a child. I let her take them. They were just objects. I was done fighting over material things with people who didn't understand the difference between price and value. Linda and I watched from the window as they loaded Derek's car, sat inside having an intense conversation, then finally drove away down Maple Street toward their uncertain future. The house felt immediately different, lighter despite the heavy emotional weight of what had occurred. Linda asked if I was okay, and I told her the honest truth. I didn't know yet, but I would be. We changed the locks that evening, Linda driving to the hardware store for new deadbolts, while I called a locksmith for the side door requiring professional installation. The locksmith was a young man named Marcus, who I'd known since he was Tyler's classmate in elementary school. He installed the new locks, refused payment because his grandmother had been friends with Robert, and told me if I ever needed anything to call him directly. Small-town networks proving their worth again. By 9 o'clock, my house was secure, my documentation safely stored in multiple locations, and Linda firmly camped in the guest room insisting she'd stay through Wednesday. We ordered pizza, ate it in front of the television watching a mindless comedy neither of us really saw, and processed the day in small, quiet comments. Linda said she was proud of me, that what I'd done required tremendous courage and clarity. I told her I'd just protected myself, that any woman would have done the same. She shook her head and said many women wouldn't have, that many elderly people doubted themselves when challenged by younger family, backed down to avoid conflict, chose false peace over necessary confrontation. Tuesday passed in a strange limbo of waiting and processing. Patricia called twice with updates. The Lottery Commission had formally rejected Vanessa's claim and sent her a certified letter explaining why, and they'd flagged her information in case she attempted future fraudulent claims. No criminal charges would be filed unless she persisted or unless I wanted to press charges for the original $20 theft, which Patricia didn't recommend. Better to let it end quietly, unless they escalated. Derek called 4 times. I didn't answer. He left voicemails progressing from angry to pleading to resigned. The last one, left at 7:30, said he was sorry, that he'd needed time to think, that he was staying at a Motel 6 on Route 9 trying to figure things out. He said Vanessa was staying with her sister Kristen, that they were talking about separation, that he was realizing he'd made terrible choices and ignored warning signs. He didn't ask to come home. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just said he was sorry and would call again in a few days. I saved all voicemails but didn't return calls. Some silences were necessary for truth to settle. Wednesday morning arrived clear and cold, late October asserting itself with frost on grass and brilliant autumn leaves. Linda drove me to the Lottery Commission office, Patricia meeting us in the parking lot with her briefcase and a confident smile. The claim process took 3 hours and involved multiple forms, identity verifications, and detailed questions about how I wanted to receive funds. Patricia recommended the lump sum despite larger tax implications, arguing that control of the full amount allowed better estate planning and investment flexibility. The lump sum, after all taxes, would be approximately $51 million. $51 million. The number still felt impossible, absurd, disconnected from my reality of clipping coupons and watching sales. David Chen himself processed my claim, apologizing again for any stress and complimenting my thorough documentation. He said in 30 years with the Lottery Commission, he'd never seen a claim better supported by evidence. The ticket was verified, authenticated, confirmed, legitimate. The money would be transferred to a secure account Patricia had helped me establish within 6 weeks, pending final processing. We celebrated quietly that evening at Linda's house, just my sister, her husband George, and me. George made his famous lasagna and opened wine that had been aging in their basement for a decade. George toasted to justice, to smart women, to second chapters arriving when you least expected them. I drank 1 glass and felt it go straight to my head, mixing with exhaustion and relief and grief I hadn't fully acknowledged. I'd won $87 million, secured my home, protected myself from exploitation. But I'd also lost my son, at least temporarily, and possibly permanently. That loss sat heavy in my chest, despite the rightness of my actions. Linda said gently that time would help, that Derek would eventually understand, that sometimes the greatest gift we could give our children was letting them face consequences of their choices. I wanted to believe her, wanted to believe my son would find his way back to values Robert and I had tried to instill. But wanting something didn't make it guaranteed. Only time would reveal whether Derek's character could recover from this test. I returned home Thursday afternoon, after Linda finally felt confident I'd be safe alone. The silence when I entered felt peaceful rather than lonely, spacious rather than empty. I walked through each room seeing possibilities instead of ghosts, seeing my future instead of my past. The house needed updating, I realized, not Vanessa's version of gutting and modernizing, but thoughtful improvements, honoring its history while making it more comfortable. Maybe I'd finally renovate the master bathroom with its 1985 fixtures. Maybe I'd update the kitchen with efficient appliances. Maybe I'd convert Robert's workshop into something new, serving present needs rather than preserving past memories. Or maybe I'd keep it exactly as it was, a testament to a complicated man and difficult marriage that had still given me Derek and taught me strength I didn't know I possessed. These were decisions for later, after the money arrived, after shock faded, after I figured out who I wanted to become as a wealthy 72-year-old woman with resources and options. Tyler called Friday evening, having heard the full story from his mother Jennifer about everything that had happened. He said his dad had called him crying, claiming I'd ruined his life over money, that I'd chosen greed over family. Tyler had listened for 10 minutes, then told his father something that made me love my grandson even more. Dad, Grandma didn't ruin your life. You made choices that had consequences. She just refused to be your victim. Then Tyler had ended the call and phoned me to check in, to make sure I was okay, to tell me he was proud and completely on my side. We talked for over an hour about everything and nothing, about his classes, his relationship with Emma, whether he might propose soon. Normal family things, conversations reminding me family wasn't just blood and obligation. Family was also choice and respect and mutual support and people who stood beside you when standing was costly. Tyler was family in the truest sense. Derek was still working on whether he qualified. The following weeks passed in a blur of legal appointments, financial consultations, and planning for a future I'd never imagined. Patricia introduced me to financial advisor Sandra Lopez, a sharp woman specializing in sudden wealth management and protecting lottery winners from specific challenges they typically faced. Sandra explained that lottery winners often dealt with family demanding money, scammers targeting them, lifestyle inflation destroying their windfall within years if they weren't disciplined. She recommended a conservative investment strategy, immediate estate planning, and firm boundaries about gifts and loans to family, regardless of relationships. We set up an irrevocable trust with Tyler as one beneficiary and several charities as others. We established clear rules: no loans ever, only gifts I decided independently on my timeline, nothing promised under pressure or guilt. Sandra said these rules would be tested, that Derek would likely ask for money eventually, that I needed to decide now what I was willing to give. I thought about that question for days, examining my feelings, separating love from obligation. My answer surprised me with its clarity. Nothing. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Derek needed to find his own way without his mother's money rescuing him from his choices. The money arrived in my account, December 3rd, $51.2 million appearing in my balance like fiction rather than reality. Sandra had prepared me for this moment, warned me that seeing that many zeros could be overwhelming and could trigger impulsive decisions. She'd been right. My first instinct was to call Derek immediately, to share this bizarre reality with my son. But I called Linda instead, and we sat on the phone in silence, both looking at the bank account screen. Finally, Linda said, "Margaret, you did it. You protected yourself. You won. Now figure out what winning means to you." That became my project for following weeks, defining what this money meant, what I wanted to do with it, what kind of person I wanted to be with resources I'd never imagined. I didn't want to become someone unrecognizable, someone consumed by wealth or changed beyond recognition. I wanted to remain myself, just with more options and security. I started small, testing what generosity felt like from abundance rather than scarcity. I donated $50,000 to the women's shelter, where I'd volunteered decades ago. I established a scholarship fund at the community college, where I'd taken bookkeeping classes, funding 10 full scholarships annually for women over 50 returning to education. I paid off Tyler's student loans, his car loan, and gave him and Emma $50,000 toward a house down payment. I renovated my house thoughtfully, updating systems while keeping its character. I hired Jeremy Morton to paint the exterior, paid him double his quote, tipped him another $1,000. I bought a new reliable car, nothing flashy, just a Honda Accord that would last 20 years. I set aside $2 million in a separate account I'd never touch, designated for nursing home care if I eventually needed it. That fund bought me freedom from future vulnerability. Christmas approached with complicated emotions about family gatherings and traditions. Tyler called mid-December, asking where we'd gather, assuming I'd host like I had for 4 decades. I told him gently I wasn't hosting this year, that I was planning a quiet day with Linda and George, that he was welcome, but Derek wasn't invited. Tyler went silent, processing this break with tradition. Then he asked if I was certain, if this was what I wanted. I told him it was necessary, that Derek hadn't apologized genuinely or taken responsibility or shown me he understood what he'd done wrong. Until that changed, I needed distance. Tyler said he understood and would come with Emma. He'd tell his father separately, let Derek figure out his own plans. I thanked Tyler for understanding, for not pressuring me toward reconciliation, for respecting my boundaries without making me feel guilty. Some grandsons became better men than their fathers. Tyler was proving that truth. Derek sent a letter mid-November, handwritten pages in an envelope with a return address I didn't recognize. His cramped handwriting covered both sides of 3 sheets. He wrote that he'd moved into a small apartment, that Vanessa had filed for divorce, that he was in therapy, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. He wrote that he saw things more clearly now, that Vanessa had been manipulating him longer than he'd realized. He'd discovered she'd opened credit cards in his name, had debts he hadn't known about, had been fired from her dental job for stealing petty cash months before she'd claimed to quit. He wrote that he'd been willfully blind because he'd wanted to believe in his marriage, that he'd ignored evidence and dismissed my concerns. Then Derek wrote the words I'd been waiting to hear. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm genuinely sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry I chose someone I'd known 3 years over the woman who raised me and sacrificed everything. I'm sorry I let you down. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I finally see what I couldn't see before, and I'm ashamed." I read that letter 3 times, looking for manipulation or strategic apologies designed to access my money. But the words felt genuine, felt like they'd been written in real pain and honest examination rather than calculation. I set the letter aside and didn't respond immediately, letting it sit while I examined my own feelings. Was I ready to forgive? Did forgiveness require reconciliation? Could I love my son while maintaining boundaries? These questions had complicated answers that shifted depending on my mood and energy. Linda said I didn't have to decide quickly, that relationships could heal slowly, that Derek's journey back to integrity would take time, and I was allowed to move at my own pace. So I waited patiently. I sat with my complicated feelings without rushing toward forgiveness or permanent rejection. Somewhere between those extremes existed a relationship that might work eventually, but it would look different than before. It would be built on demonstrated honesty rather than assumed obligation, on earned respect rather than automatic assumption, on clear boundaries rather than boundless accommodation. Spring arrived with crocuses pushing through late snow, with birdsong at dawn, with light returning earlier and staying later. I felt the seasonal shift in my body and spirit, felt something like renewed possibility stirring after months of grief and adjustment. Derek and I had established a careful rhythm of occasional phone calls and monthly coffee dates, always in public places, always with time limits, always boundaried but increasingly honest. He told me about his job, about a promotion after he'd volunteered for extra projects. He told me about therapy breakthroughs and struggles with trusting his judgment about people. He told me he was cautiously dating someone new named Rachel, who worked in his building, that he was trying to move slowly and recognize red flags he'd missed before. I listened without excessive commentary, offering thoughts only when asked, mostly letting Derek talk and process his life without my interference or rescue. This version of motherhood felt strange and distant, but it also felt healthier than our previous enmeshed dynamic. Maybe this was what adult relationships between parents and grown children should look like. Interested but boundaried, loving but not controlling, present but not consuming. Tyler and Emma set their wedding date for June 15th, deciding on a small ceremony in Linda's backyard with just close family and friends. Tyler asked me to share a few words during the ceremony about love and commitment. I spent weeks writing and rewriting, trying to distill 7 decades into something meaningful, but not preachy, honest, but not cynical. What I finally settled on felt right. Love isn't just feeling or attraction. Love is choosing someone repeatedly, especially when choosing them is difficult. Love is protecting each other's dignity, even in conflict. Love is seeing clearly who someone is and valuing that person without needing them different. Continue choosing it deliberately, and you'll build something that survives storms. I spoke those words on a perfect June afternoon, my voice steady despite emotions churning underneath. I saw Emma wipe tears while Tyler squeezed her hand. After the ceremony, Derek approached carefully and asked if we could talk privately. We walked to the edge of Linda's property where her yard bordered woods. Derek said he'd been thinking about my ceremony words, about choosing someone repeatedly, especially when it was difficult. He said he hadn't done that for me, hadn't chosen me when choosing me meant standing up to Vanessa, meant facing uncomfortable truths, meant risking his marriage. He said he'd been a coward and a bad son, and that no amount of therapy or time could change that history. But he hoped maybe we could write a different future, one where he made better choices, where he valued what mattered instead of what was easy. I told him honestly that I'd already forgiven him, not because he'd earned it, but because carrying anger was exhausting, and I wanted my remaining years to feel light rather than heavy. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending nothing happened. It meant releasing Derek from my judgment while maintaining boundaries that protected me. Derek asked what those boundaries were, what our relationship could look like. I told him we'd figure it out together gradually, one interaction at a time, building trust slowly through consistent actions rather than grand promises. 1 year after that April morning, when Vanessa had slid a lottery ticket across my counter with such confidence, I stood in my renovated kitchen making coffee and reflecting on everything that had changed. The house was still mine, now updated but still recognizable. My relationship with Derek was cautiously rebuilding, different but potentially healthier. Tyler and Emma were married and thriving. I had financial security beyond anything I'd imagined and freedom to help people I cared about. Most importantly, I had my dignity and self-respect intact because I'd refused to be victimized by people who'd assumed my age meant weakness. That morning taught me that 72 wasn't too old to fight for yourself, wasn't too old to demand respect, wasn't too old to start a completely new chapter. If you're facing something similar, remember that age is just a number, but dignity is everything. Stand up for yourself, document everything carefully, and never let anyone make you feel invisible or disposable. Sometimes karma needs help from careful planning and a good lawyer. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well and refusing to be anyone's victim.